All right, so I've been painting off and on for, well, I mean, I've been painting my whole life, but automotive stuff, uh, I'd used to be an automotive painter in a body shop back in the 80s. I'm going to talk to you guys about the difference between the paints now and spraying the paints now and the old paints that we used to use. I did a lot of stuff with Glasso Max, which is now called Glasserit. Okay, I did a lot of stuff with RM, and the new RM is still there, but it's really gotten super expensive. I use PPG a lot, so all of those coatings actually I used all of them, and and I really like BASF the best. They seem to have the best stuff. The Europeans always were way ahead of us. And my favorite was the base coat clear coat, which was brand new, um, which was by Meracryl, was Meracryl by RM, and it matched up similar to Glasso Max, which is like Glasserit. So you guys, same thing, has the parrot, all the same stuff. If you can look it up, check it out. You'll see old pictures of cans that I used to use. So anyway, let's talk about the difference between materials now and the materials then. And everybody, you'll have people that'll say, "Oh, Mike, it's not as good now as it used to be." It's, you know what? It's at least as good now as it was back then. Probably the materials are a little bit better, but the thing is, you don't know the new paints if you're an old school guy, and why the stuff you're having problems with, you're having problem with if you are, and you just got to learn the new stuff. It's just different. It's not the same. It's different. It's a completely different type of material. So I'm just going to talk about what the difference is, so you can easily figure this out, to know how to fit, to get the concept down, so you can figure out how to make it work for you better. Okay, if you're just getting back into it, maybe you're an old school painter, or you painted your own car back years ago and you're trying to do it with today's materials. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the differences. On your base coats, the base coats are thinner than they used to be. The old base coats in the 80s had more thickness. You could go over a heavier grit sandpaper and it would cover the scratches. So to get around that now, the best way is use a sealer. The sealers they have now are actually thicker than the old ones. The old ones back in the 80s were just like it was like a whitewash thing. It was like made out of a lacquer base or something like that, and it wasn't very thick. They were for really super thin. And the ones they have now are a little bit thicker, and you can, because they're a two-part, and you can put them on, and it'll actually fill in a little bit more scratch than to make up for some of that stuff. So some of the guys today will say, no, you can't use that. It doesn't fill in the scratches enough. It did for me. If you're using a solvent base like this thing here, let's pull it out in the light and take a look at it. For instance, this is a pearl base. If it was silver, you might see some mottle here, but you don't see anything at all with this. All I see is a little bit of where I haven't wiped off all the polish. It's actually not swirl marks. It's actually, if you play with it, you can actually wipe it off. I haven't washed it yet. But you'd see a little bit of, you might see a little bit, so you might have to do, like if you're using silver, you might have to actually sand it with 600 grit, like the guys say, because the material on the base coats is thinner. The clear coats today, people say it's harder than the old ones, and it's really not harder. It's just more rubbery. Okay, so how do you combat with that? Versus the old material was hard shell. It was much more brittle than the material is now, so it wasn't as flexible as it is now. For the flex panels, that's actually really important for like rubber panels and things like that, bumpers, stuff like that. The stuff back then was flexible, but not as flexible as the stuff is today. So in that respect, as far as painting the rubber bumpers, it's actually better. But in the old school times, it polished really easy with a rubbing compound. Now with today's finish, if you try and use the same rubbing compound that you used back then, it kind of bounces off of the clear as you're trying to buff it. So it seems like it's taken forever. You can't get the sanding scratches out of it. When what you need to do is you need to switch to a polish. And what I've used now versus then is you had to relearn a lot of things. One of the things I changed to is this Manzurna or CSI Creamex, which is better for the polishing of the material of the surface. It's a polish, it's not a rubbing compound. Rubbing compounds don't work on these new finishes very well. It just kind of, like I said, it kind of bounces off of them. And people say it's harder, but it's really not harder. It's actually more rubberized. And that's the difference between today's finishes and the old ones. Now, spray techniques and spraying with the new finishes. Back in the old days, I could run down to Costco. Back then it was called Price Club, and I could just buy a generic Binks copy spray gun, or I could get a DeVilbiss copy, or I could get a whatever sharp gun, or I could use a DeVilbiss gun, and I could use any spray gun that I could pick and put in my hands, and I could crank the pressure up nice and high, and I could spray anything perfectly smooth without an issue. It was really easy to spray versus today. Today, to get a really nice smooth finish, either you're gonna do it on your polishing, or you're gonna get a good spray gun. So, the cheapest gun I found was the Technopro Light. It's totally different spray technique than the old spray guns. The old spray guns, you wanted to be about 6 to 8 or 8 to 12 inches away. You're way further away from the surface when you're spraying with the old spray guns, because it broke the finish up finer, and the finish wouldn't start to dry as quickly as these new finishes do when you put them on. So you got to be a lot closer to the work with this type of spray gun. If you're using an Iwata or some of those other ones, you still are far away. So that's why a lot of guys today want to use an Iwata Supernova, because it more relates to the old type of spraying where you were further away, and it all works, you guys. It's just technique. And what I'm trying to explain to you guys, it's you say, oh well, this doesn't work. No, it's just what you're doing doesn't work. It still works. You just have to learn the different way to make what spray gun you're using work for the material you have. So it's just different. It's not the same. It's not going to relate. You can't take the old spray techniques, the old spray gun, and say it was better than the new ones. It's not. The new ones are just as good, but it's just different. It's a different technique. It's a different type of spray system, and both work really well. In fact, once you learn the new stuff, I think it actually is better paint than most of the old ones. Now, would I say that the new base coats are better than the old base coats that we had? No, not really. The base coats back then actually had better coverage and were smoother. Well, some ways it's easier, some ways it's not. I would say the base coats back then were actually a little bit thicker, and it made it a little bit easier because you could use a heavier grit sandpaper to do your finish work. So you have to kind of think about things a little bit ahead of time. Know that your base coat is a lot thinner. It doesn't have the mill thickness that the other stuff did, and so it's not going to fill in like the other ones used to back years ago. I mean, literally, I could put 3 coats of base down with the old Glassamax, and it'd be, I'd have every scratch filled in with 220 that I sanded, but I didn't always finish with 220 with those old cars, Mercedes Benz and stuff like that I was using to match those. I would use 400 normally, but it would fill in with 220 if you wanted it to. But I didn't usually do that on the Mercedes, BMWs, Volkswagens, stuff like that. So that I was using that type of paint with. So as far as, I just want to explain to you guys, it's different. It's not the same. You got to learn, and if you understand that the finish is more rubbery now on the clear coats, then it makes it easier for you to understand that you're not pushing on your buffer like you used to be with the old ones. You're just working your buffer and letting the buffer polish the finish, versus the other ones you kind of want to almost scratch scratch into the coat, where this stuff you're just kind of laying on the top of it and polishing it. So the techniques are a little bit different today than they were back in the old days. So you guys that are younger want to find out what it was like to be in the old days. That's kind of what it was. It was just a hard finish. And the old lacquers and stuff like that, you just lean on the buffer, and you didn't, if it was dry, you didn't worry about burning it. You wouldn't burn it. But you had to lean on it to get the finish done. Where today it's more of, you're just laying on the top, you're polishing, and let the buffer do the work. So it's just a completely different technique of polishing. So it's just stuff I've playing around with the new finishes versus the old. And some of you guys that are just getting back into it, you're probably trying to, maybe you're older and you're trying to do your old show car or something, work on it. Just keep that in mind. It's not worse. It's just different. It's just not the same. But guys are getting, you see a lot more really, really nice finishes at the shows than you did back in the old days. And that's because the paint's better. It's just learning the techniques to use it is different. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Like, share, and subscribe. If you're an old school guy trying to learn the new stuff, keep watching. You'll find some stuff that will help you out. Talk to you in the next video.